If you're using Windows, this is the video for you. What we're going to do here is go through all the things that need to happen to get your computer ready to develop code for this course. So this is a walkthrough, ultimately, of this Lab 1 setup link here. And it basically goes through everything you need to do. Now there's pictures and links and so forth, and technically you don't even need this video. But I personally just hate setting up programming environments, particularly when there's some gigantic list of things I need to do with all kinds of just options I don't understand, don't really know what's going on, and then I just kind of crossing my fingers the whole time that nothing goes terribly wrong. So this video is basically one of these. I mean, I love the future where I can just go to YouTube and look up videos of people installing stuff, and that way at least I can look at it and I can say, okay, well that's what it's supposed to look like, and there's directions I can follow. So if you're like me and like the video walkthroughs, then let's do it. Otherwise, I guess you can just go through the text directions. So the first thing you want to do is install Java. I'm going to do it by clicking on this JDK link. I'm going to accept the license agreement, whatever it says, and hopefully I'm not signing over anything important, like the baby or anything else. And then I will download the Windows executable, and I'll run that. But the only thing I'm actually not going to do live in this video is that, because one, it takes a long time, and two, there's no interesting options. Now, the only thing I do want to mention is that the Java installer, for me at least, when it was running, it got to like 90%, and then it just stopped forever, and I thought maybe it had crashed or something, and then it worked. So maybe that'll happen to you. Okay, so now that you're done with that, we'll move on to part B, which is where we're going to have a series of bizarre commands, and if you've never used a terminal window before, it'll be especially strange. So I'm going to click the Windows instructions, and the first thing I'm going to do is, well, I guess I have already installed Java, and the second thing I'm going to do is install Python 3. So to do that, I go to the website, and I will download Python 3. Now, one thing I will note about this course is we may never use Python at all, but I still think it's handy to have just in case. It may be that we may give you some Python scripts that will make your life easier, so we'll install it here just in case. So one thing to make sure to do is to click this Add Python to Path, and then click Install. That will make sure by clicking that box that whenever you try and run Python from the command line, which I'll show you in a moment, then it will actually work. Okay, so actually one thing I guess I'll note is, remember that thing about long sequences of arcane instructions? It is super easy to miss things in instructions, particularly when the person writing the instructions didn't include a nice picture of the button you clicked. So maybe I'll add that. So this is a point in favor of this video. Let's see how we're doing. Because hey, it would have been pretty easy to miss that checkbox. Okay, so it's going. Okay, now setup is successful. It gives me an option to disable the path length. I don't actually know what that means exactly or why I'd want to do it, so I'm going to say not click it, and then I'm going to say close. Okay, so at this point we have installed Python, and it's not in the directions, but what that means is that if I open a command prompt, I can now type Python, and Python runs. Okay. Now I'll talk more about what I just did in a moment, but hey, I've installed Python. You can do that if you want, but we're not going to in the official instructions. So the next thing we're going to do is install Git, which is going to be used for both version control and also going to be how we interact with our computer from the terminal. And that'll make sense in a moment. So once you click that, it should download. If you're somebody for whom the automatic download does not work, you should click this link. 64 bits fine, unless you're using an incredibly old computer, like pre-2003. So 64-bit Git should be good to go. Now with Git, by contrast, there's going to be tons of options, and the options matter. So I'll say next. I pick where I want it to go. The default option is fine. And the first option we get brought up with that's actually interesting is whether or not I want Windows Explorer integration. So what that means is if we go to, say, I don't know, users, downloads, whatever. Okay, so here's a bunch of stuff I downloaded. If I right click on it, there are a bunch of options that I can see here. And what it's asking me here is whether or not I want Git-related stuff to show up in this context menu. So you may or may not want to. I'm going to turn it off because I pretty much never use the right-click menus for anything. But you can turn it on if you think you might want to. It doesn't really affect it. It's just, in my case, I don't want to clutter up my right-click menus that I never use. So I click Next. Then it says, do you want to create some start menu shortcuts? Sure, whatever. Okay, next up it asks me about which kind of editor I want to use. Now here, you might ask, why do we have a text editor? What does a text editor have to do with anything? There are occasions when you're using Git where a text editor will suddenly appear, and this is which text editor to use. So there's Nano, which is really easy to use, and there's Vim, which is incredibly powerful, but super obtuse. So I personally really like Vim, but it is just an incredibly counterintuitive text editor to use. So I would strongly suggest that you pick Nano unless you've used Vim. But I'm gonna pick Vim because I know it well. Okay, next, do you want to use Git from Git Bash, use Git from the Windows command prompt, or use it, blah, 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 all this stuff. You should say use Git from Git Bash only. And that's because we're gonna be using Git Bash instead of the Windows command prompt, okay? Now, that may not actually mean anything to you, but that's the assumption we're going to have for the course. Okay, which OpenSSL? That one's fine. Okay, this is the open source SSL. That's what I want. Okay, what kind of line endings do I want? You can Google what this means, but you should pick this top option. Okay, next up, do I want to use min_tty or the Windows default command window? So I suggest using min_tty. That's the assumption I'm going to make throughout the rest of the video. It has to do with kind of the aesthetics and the feel of your terminal window. And min_tty I personally prefer, but either one technically works. But I would use this one so that you're consistent with what we expect, particularly if you are a student programming, or a student who's actually interacting with TAs and taking the course in real life. Okay, so min_tty. Okay, these three things, sure, great, install, and now we'll let it run. Okay, so Git is now installing. And one of the interesting things I'm going to get, sorry, I wasn't even trying to make a joke. Now I feel bad for even raising my eyebrows. But what we're going to end up getting is a piece of version control software and an alternative to our Windows terminal. Okay, so I will say finish. And so now let's talk a little bit about the terminal and what we're going to use it for in this class. Now this video is not going to walk through how the terminal works. You may have never seen the terminal, but let me talk just a little bit about what it is. Okay. So on computers, there's basically two different ways to talk to your operating system. One of them is by clicking on things, right? Right-clicking, the other is through a terminal. So I can open up a terminal by, in Windows, for example, doing CMD. And this is a window which lets me control various aspects of my computer. For example, I can list all the files in my C users hug directory with dir, and here they are. Now we're not going to use the Windows command prompt that's built into Windows for this course. Instead, we're going to use something called Git Bash that's more Linux, more like Linux in its behavior. So to do that, in Windows 10 at least, I go down here to search and I say Git Bash. That got installed. And so what I have here is an alternative to this Windows command prompt. And this is the one I'm going to assume that you're going to use. Okay. Now, the advantages or disadvantages of each are far beyond the scope of this video. You can play around with it if you want, but we personally recommend using Git Bash with all the options that we picked earlier. I can use Control plus to increase the size here, which I'm going to do since this is a demonstration video, make it pretty big. And we're going to start trying to work on our computer from here. So what you'll do in Lab 1 and in Project 0 is compile and run your programs from the command line, and there's going to be an important command called javac. So if you type javac, I get command not found, and that's no good. Okay, and maybe I'll just mention a couple things here. What all this stuff on the screen is, this is telling me the name of my computer and my username. I actually don't know exactly. I have a texture of what that means, but I'm not going to go into it. This is the current folder I'm in, which is called tilde. Okay, and this $sign is saying, tell me something. And this is what I just typed, and this is the response I get back. So basically what our computer is saying is, you want to you said you wanted to run Java, but I don't know what that means. And actually, if for you actually had something pop up, you're actually done with setup. I don't know how you did it, but you've just saved yourself some trouble, and you can continue on to part C, learning to use the terminal. Okay. Now, for those of you who it's not working yet, there's some mysterious stuff we need to do together. Okay. So I'm going to explain a little bit more than I might really need to, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we're going to try and do. So the problem is that while we have installed Java, our terminal does not know how to find Java. In particular, I'm going to tell you some secrets. Okay. So the issue is that when you try to run a program, it looks in something called an environment variable, an environment variable named path. Okay. And we can actually see what path is by doing echo path. And here we see a bunch of stuff show up. And what this is telling us is all the places that our computer looks when we type a command. So for example, this is a directory that's called, let's see, I had an interesting one. Oh, look at this one. So there's a directory called ctools ffmpeg/bin. So if I go to ctools ffmpeg/bin, I could see a bunch of programs here, right? So if I do, for example, ffmpeg, the reason this works and it doesn't work is because there is something called ffmpeg, and it's in a folder which is on my path. Okay. Now, even if that didn't make sense, that's okay. You can still continue with this video, but just some extra information for those of you who might be curious. Okay. So the trouble is that the place where we installed Java is not in this big old list that's hard to read. And how do we know that? Well, because when I type Java C, it doesn't show up. Okay. So we're going to fix that. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to edit our path. Okay. Now we're going to start by first defining a new environment variable called Java Home. And then we're going to edit our path so that it includes Java Home. And we'll see what that means in the following steps. Okay. So what we do here is we're going to go to Windows Search, and I'm going to type the word environment. And we'll see up pop edit the system environment variables. We will click on this. Okay. The next step is to click on environment variables, and you should see a window like this pop up. Now, if you're using Windows 7 or 8, it'll probably look a little different. I have some screenshots here, Windows 7 and Windows 8, that show you what they look like, but I won't show them here. Okay, so now we have gotten to this point where we have our environment variables. And so now I'm going to click New. I'm going to enter Java_home. And here I'm going to enter the location of where we installed what was called the Java JDK. So that place on my computer, at least, the default option, if you didn't change it, should be C Program Files Java JDK 9.01 or so. I actually have 4 different Javas installed, but you want to pick the most recent one that includes JDK in the name. So it's really important that you pick something that says JDK and not JRE, because otherwise, well, it's not worth explaining, but we go to this folder, okay? So now once you've found this folder, which will have a name very similar to this, copy it into your variable value, wherever Java is, and then I'll click OK. All right. And so now what we see is we have a new environment variable called Java Home. Okay. Now we can actually access that by, I have to close my old terminal window. I'll open a new one. Oops, wrong one. Okay. So now if I were to, for example, do echo Java Home, oh, sorry, I'm gonna click OK. So now if I do echo Java Home, I see that now my terminal is aware that there's something called Java Home. If I do Java C, however, it still doesn't work, and that's because we still need to edit the path. Okay. So the next step after we have created our new variable Java Home is to go down to Path and click Edit. So now when we look at our environment variable for path, these are all the places that Windows will look for things when we do Java C. So we want to add a new one. And in particular, we want to add percent Java Home %/bin, and then we press enter. So it's exactly what's shown here, percent Java Home /bin. and I press OK. All right, and then once I've done that, I will click OK over here. And now here's a really important point. You need to actually close your git bash window. Otherwise, it doesn't get the new environment variables. And now when I do echo path, you will see somewhere in here, let's do it again. There we go, C program files java jdk / bin. Okay. Now you're like, wasn't it java home / bin? Yes, but of course java home was C program files java jdk. So it basically substitutes in that for java home. And so now when I type java c, it works. And in particular, what's happening here is it's going to, what's this file? Program files, java jdk 9.01 bin. Here, if we look in this folder, we'll see there's something called java c, and that's what's getting run. Okay, so perhaps more information than you really needed to know, but hopefully following those steps, you can get to this point. Now, if you had some trouble getting java c to work, you should look very carefully back at the video or these instructions and make sure you followed them. And failing that, feel free to check Piazza or with the TA. So that's it for Windows setup. At this point, we are pretty much done. If you want, there is a couple more sections here that actually, no, you should definitely do these 2 sections. This video won't cover them, but that's Windows setup. Okay, thanks, and I'll see you in a future video.